The 42%, as high as 42%, is now 39% of pastors who say that they have given serious consideration to quitting.
That was David Kinnaman, CEO of the Barna Group. For nearly 40 years, Barna has been leading the research on the intersection of faith and culture. David is also the author of the best-selling books, Faith for Exiles, Good Faith, You Lost Me, and Unchristian. The body of Barna's research gives it a unique vision of the church landscape. Stay with us as ECFA's President, Michael Martin, and ECFA's Senior Vice President of Research and Equipping, Warren Bird, discuss with David what the Barna Group sees in the data, what are the trends, and what does healthy leadership have to do with it.
Well, welcome to the ECFA podcast. I'm so honored today to be joined by a couple of special guests who really need no introduction. One is Dr. Warren Bird, who is the Senior Vice President of Research and Equipping here at ECFA, and also our special guest, a friend of ECFA, David Kinnaman, the President of Barna. Warren and David, so good to have you today. And I know talking about a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is healthy leadership. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Great to be here.
Well, and since we have the luxury too, David, let Warren and I just say how much we appreciate you and your work at Barna. You all really set the gold standard when it comes to research. And so as we launch into this conversation today on healthy leadership, and there have been some great reports that have come out from Barna just exploring this topic. I know for so many of us in the ministry community, it's a little bit of a sobering time, right? As we look at the state of leadership, but so many of the findings, the research that you've done has really helped us to better understand what's happening, what's going on. We've done some of our own research at ECFA that Warren's excited to share about, but just thank you so much, David, for the work that you and Barna do.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me be on the podcast. And Warren is a fantastic researcher and an even better friend. So it's nice to be with you here today. And thanks for the kind words about Barna. I mean, we're happy to serve, and it's been an interesting season to be serving in.
Yes, no, that's right. Well, I couldn't agree more. And why don't we just launch in there? I think kind of starting with big picture, and love to get into some of the specifics as far as what you all are finding, as it relates to leadership and just things that are helpful practices. We'll get to all that here in just a moment. But David, just as you're kind of taking that bird's eye view at the ministry community, what is it that you're seeing as it relates to churches and ministries and leadership? What's encouraging to you, and what's something that maybe you're a little more concerned about?
Well, one of the things that I'm encouraged about is that we've worked with a research agency called Heart and Mind, a friend of mine, Dee Alsop, and they've actually been looking at attitudes and perspectives related to whether religion is good for our society or bad for our society across all U.S. adults. And actually, one of the encouraging things that we saw in that research was that compared to just 5 years ago, currently fewer people think that religion is bad, that faith is bad for our society. In 2016, half of Americans believed that religion was bad for society, that faith and religion were bad for society, but that number has actually dropped now to just 2 in 5. So it's still a huge percentage of people, but I actually think that COVID and everything that has happened over the last couple of years, the church has shown up in some meaningful ways, and actually people have noticed. And some of our data actually shows similar kinds of things. When we look at people's perceptions of local Christian churches, there's been a real uptick in people's positive perception. So I actually think that's a good sign. There's still plenty of negative perceptions. I'm of the feeling like we should pay attention to it. We shouldn't be driven by it. We should be informed by the data. We shouldn't be driven by the data. And obviously we can't cater to people that have negative perceptions. But I do think there's a real sense of the reputation of the church that has improved. And I think the good work of churches, the courageous way in which they've been sort of spiritual frontline workers in the last couple of years has been really positive, and I'm encouraged by that. And then I think on the concerning side, there's lots of things to be positive about, lots of things to be concerned about. But among the things that I think we could be concerned about is the 42%, as high as 42%, is now 39% of pastors who say that they have given serious consideration to quitting. And I think that tells us something about the challenges of being a spiritual frontline worker, about the kind of exhaustion that is set in for a lot of leaders, I do think this is a primary issue, the ability for us to retain the right leaders in pastoral leadership, and to encourage them. I know we're going to be talking quite a bit about that today in the podcast, but I think this pressure that so many industries have felt, so many of us have felt, but recognizing that pastors are just at a really low point. I think this is starting to recover some as people's lives are getting back to some kind of normalcy. But I think that 39%, 2 in every 5 pastors who say that they are giving serious consideration to quitting is something we should be ringing alarm bells about.
No, that's right. And David, I so appreciate your comments because it really aligns so much with the heart of ECFA and even this conversation, which is there are, a number of things we care about, but very high on the top of those lists are both, we really care about leaders and about the calling that God has placed on them. And just, you hear some of those challenges that leaders are walking through. And so even in just this conversation today, and as we unpack some of the struggles that they're walking through, it really comes from a place of we really care for leaders and want to unpack all that with you in a moment. But also something I heard too, David, and what you said is really caring about the capital C church, organization, sort of the perception of church, if you will. It was encouraging to hear you say that maybe we're moving the needle a little bit in the right direction. So all of that is good. I don't know if you've researched this particular area or not, but maybe bringing these two topics together, David, have you all done any research around even this idea of healthy leadership or unhealthy leadership? And how does that impact the levels of trust that folks have in the church, in ministry?
We have done quite a bit of work on that. And in some ways, I actually think you could look at just the body of work our company has produced, starting with George Barna and then continuing with me and with our team, that in some ways, the projects that we've been able to focus on, a project called You Lost Me, which was the loss of faith. A lot of people misunderstood the data or have had sort of this idea that people walk away from faith and it's still a huge problem. 22% of young people who grow up in Christian faith actually lose their faith entirely. That's actually double what it was. It was 11% back in 2011. So I think that the algorithms and the what I call digital Babylon have made it more difficult for us to disciple. But still, there's a huge number of people that lapse in faith. They call themselves Christian, but they're not very active. And so that book really focused and tried to shine a light on some of the challenges of discipleship. Another project called Unchristian focused on the negative perceptions of the church. I think another project that I did with Gabe Lyons called Good Faith was a focus on, what happens when Christianity is viewed as irrelevant and extreme. And in each of these cases, it's not, we live in a complicated society and the church is not always perceived in a friendly manner. But a lot of the challenges that I think the church has today, whether it's the lack of discipleship or the lack of an effective public witness or, the loss of faith among young people, I think are failures of leadership and unhealthy leadership and an inability to sort of measure the most important things that ought to matter. And so we sit, I think, at an interesting crossroads for the Christian community in general. We're referring, obviously to local churches, but also to the parachurch organizations and other entities that support into, sort of the faith ecosystem in the Christian space. And I think it's a really exciting time because I think there's opportunities for really great and transcendent and humble leadership to emerge. And I think we're seeing signs of that, signs of life all over the place. But in the midst of that, we have to be able to take a good hard look at some of the things that haven't worked. And the fact that young people who are science-minded, for example, that are growing up who want careers in science, technology, engineering, and math have almost no discipleship opportunities in local churches. I mean, that's a real failure of leadership in my mind. And it ends up, showing, I think, in the data as we end up losing many of those young people who are interested in those kinds of careers, what I call sort of a vocational discipleship mindset. So, I think our job is always to shine a light on these things and try to ask and inspire the church to be a better version of itself. And, sometimes we're characterized as sort of looking only at the bad news. That's not certainly our heart. Our heart is to try to point out what those areas where we can grow, where we can do it better, where we can find, I think, a more faithful way.
Yeah, no, that's right. You've connected some dots really well for us. So yeah, thank you for that, David. Warren, I invite you too, into this, kind of what's your perspective? I know we've done a lot of research here too at ECFA and touched on some of these themes. So Warren, what's kind of your reaction to some of what David's sharing?
Well, Michael, let me respond to that from me, and then I'll end up with a question to David. Overall, I'm really encouraged by how many books and writing and speaking there is out there on the issue of caring for the senior leader, for soul care, for all the awareness that's being raised and research being done on, okay, so how are we actually doing in caring for the leader, where we have some numbers and some quantities. Some things surprised me, like ECFA just did the nation's largest survey of church planners, and one of the questions I asked was about their mental health. How was it before you launched, then during the pandemic, and then today? And to my surprise, they all rated it about the same on median average, and this was very encouraging. And yet there are some disparities. One of which being the difference between the leader and the group most likely to care for the leader, that would be the board. So in one survey, we asked the board, how you doing on soul care for your leader? And they said, great. And then we asked that same question to the same leader in that same organization or church. So how's the board doing on soul care for you? And the answer is, not so well. The disparity of how we need to find actual help beyond raising the awareness. Now,
so boards and leaders not being on the same page. That's what you're saying?
Correct. So then, David, to you talked earlier about the number of leaders who think about quitting, and I'm sure that's far more than the Monday morning pastor who's time for my weekly reflection on should I throw in the towel. But you've been asking, are you thinking seriously of leaving the ministry? Do you have any actual traction on those that are following through? The great resignation, which really wasn't, or at least it hasn't happened yet in pastoral world. What are you seeing by those not just that express the concern, but are actually transitioning?
Well, one of the things that's a limitation of our research is that we can only interview people that are still available via, our pastor panel, or who are part of our, ability to call them via telephone. And so once a person leaves, we don't have a very good way of checking in with them about how they've done. And so we don't have any ability at this point to say, this is the percent that have stayed, this is the percent that have left. I'm hearing anecdotally, though, that there are, especially in certain traditions, huge gaps in the number of leaders who are available to respond to a call, to the kind of open positions. I think we're seeing sort of this great convulsions across the Christian landscape. In some ways, we're actually seeing some really good news that in some cases millennials are even more likely to show up at church after the pandemic than they were before, and that could be either show up or watch. Sort of the hybrid, the hybridization of the church has actually helped, I think, increase engagement with younger generations. So I think there's some good news there. But we're not able to sort of say the percentage of pastors who have actually quit. We just know there's too few, too few younger pastors available for open positions in many cases. And I think this also begs the question, to broaden our discussion a bit, that I think a really important set of discussions that we need to have is widening our understanding of what it means to be a pastor in our world today. That we need more and better bivocational leaders, in part because I actually think bivocational pastors have one superpower that vocational pastors don't have. And by the way, I'm all for vocational pastors. I come from a long line of pastors. My father has been a pastor in the Phoenix area for many, many years. I considered being a pastor. I think we need many, many full-time vocational pastors, but bivocational pastors have a superpower that other full-time vocational pastors don't. And that is that they don't have to respond to the whims of their congregation from a monetary perspective, right? There's something that's independent, perhaps, about people that don't get paid by the same people they're preaching to. Now, again, I think there's a biblical argument for that to be done, and I'm all for vocational pastors being paid. But I'm also just, I think we need a real interesting mix of a broadening of our understanding of what it means to lead, that even those of us in I sort of think about my ministry at Barna Group as a kind of public pastor using research as a sort of way of speaking into current issues. I feel like we're sort of pastoring pastors. I feel like we need people who can pastor and have a pastoral mindset in the workplace. I think millennials and Gen Z will not put up with the kind of the usual kind of sacred secular divides that end up plaguing the church, and so they're going to need a bivocational vision for ministry. So there's lots of different reasons why I think bivocational ministry could be an important part of the future. But I'm also, there's just there's too many open positions right now, and ways in which that sort of, I think we're going through this kind of major winnowing of church leaders, and I think that for the most part is a good thing.
So at ECFA, we're all about enhancing trust in the leader, in the confidence of donors in particular. Has all of this awareness of leader health and the occasions of leader unhealth, in your take, has that undermined trust in the congregations especially, or what's been the impact?
Yeah, I think this issue of trust is one of the most important areas for the future. There's the Edelman Trust Index and a variety of different things that focus in on kind of public health. And I think trust in general is such an important currency to be thought through and to be carefully stewarded. And I do think that pastors have to be thinking about trust and credibility, which is, by the way, part of the argument about bivocational pastoring, right? Because you're, like, let's say you had a bivocational pastor, or you had lay people who you'd ordained in a kind of pastoral way. I know there's complicated things depending on your tradition to sort through. But when you think about the opportunity of having others, people who care about the mission of the church, who aren't paid when you ask for money, to be speaking up for the case to be made for fundraising, or the reason why financial accountability is so important, right? Is we live in a radically transparent era where people are always trying to dig and see, what are they not telling me, right? And there's an undercurrent of skepticism. But I think there's important ways that we need to be thinking about trust. We're actually doing a big study on perceptions of Jesus, and we're actually finding that people have most trust in Scripture and in local church leaders to help tell them what to believe about Jesus. But they also have some amount of skepticism towards celebrity Christians and towards the algorithm, social media, and digital, even though those tend to be the places where they end up, it's sort of like you talked about earlier, this paradox between they actually do end up listening to celebrity Christians, and they do end up going to the algorithms for information about how to believe what to believe, but they tell us they trust local leaders most. And so I do think this cultivating trust, thinking about what it means, realizing that our society today is always looking for the other shoe to drop, or for a reason not to believe that we might be really, really honest. That it's not even that we're dishonest. There's something about this moment with the meme culture and that the images and pictures and sayings that are sort of small little bite-sized, usually humor, usually sort of a dark side of humor. There's something that I think has eroded our ability to believe those who are really earnest and well-meaning. There's actually, it's sort of like if you picture Michael Scott from The Office, it's like he was a very earnest character in that show, and nobody trusts him because, you're either working for corporate or you're working for yourself. And so I feel like pastors have this really challenging place today, especially with hybrid church, and you're webcasting your services, and you're trying to get the vibe just right to compel people towards certain actions, especially towards following Christ of their whole lives. And so we're really in an interesting and I think fun time to be experimenting and to be really taking an honest look at what does it mean to cultivate trust. And that's financial trust and relational trust, and trust that you have something to say to my parenting or to my relationships, trust that you might have something to say to my vocational life, my career, my purpose, trust that I could sacrifice on behalf of this community. and feel like, that my belief in what it means to be part of this Christian story, part of what it means to be Christian is actually going to matter. So I do think trust is such an important currency for our time today.
I agree. And the recent Gallup poll that looked at 50 years of trust in institution and different roles put church and pastors at an all-time low, which is just fascinating.
Yeah. And David, I wanted to pick up too on something you said. I appreciated that you talked about kind of taking an honest look. And I know one of the things, just as even reflecting on personally, the impact of some of these findings, from research. So I'm taking a little bit of a digression, but away from the numbers for a second to some of the real life stories. But, I appreciated so many of the leaders who honestly, at least in the ECFA research, sort of share with us some of the things that they're struggling with. And, one of them that's just open-ended comments and some of the statements that really moved me. One person said, somebody needs to care. Anybody, just as they were talking about the struggles they're facing and just the awkwardness of, as a leader, what does that dynamic look like with your board, and can you raise those kinds of, concerns and issues? So before we get back into a little bit more of the numbers, and those are all really good in terms of some of the challenges that leaders might be facing, I'd just love to even open it up to both of you, to Warren and to David, just as you're reflecting on some of the data that you see, what are just even personally, what's kind of stirring in you as you see, because there's always stories, that are behind these numbers. So David, anything, especially from your perspective, as you've done some of this work around leaders who are considering leaving the ministry?
Well, I think it's been a really fulfilling couple of years for me. It sort of feels like, groups like Barna were sort of built for a pandemic. We don't like to see the turmoil and the chaos, but it's been fun to have a real-time opportunity to measure public opinion during such a global crisis, and to think about its impact on the church and its impact on people. And I think that's, really encouraging, is that we've seen, again, some of the things we've said that people have seen and responded and are able to articulate that the church has actually shown up in a meaningful way. And then my colleague, Carrie Newhoff, and I had a chance of hosting a podcast for, the better part of 2 years. And it's actually been just amazing just to hear from so many leaders who were, really struck to the core about issues of what the church should do, how well we were making disciples, the heartbreak that people were experiencing as pastors when people just disappeared and never said anything, the courage and innovation and the ways that pastors were, encouraging each other through the pandemic. And we were honored to have the Church Pulse Weekly podcast be just a small part of that encouragement to people. So I like change a lot, actually. It's a funny thing. I'm just realizing that so much personally. Just I like traveling. I like new foods. I like new people. I like new business opportunities. I like new projects. I like thinking about, the future. And so I just feel like this has been a really amazing opportunity for us as church leaders to think about, Jesus' metaphor of new wineskins. I don't want to tear things down, but I do take very seriously God being an active force in our world and in our lives, and He does that through a lot of factors. But part of that is human innovation and also human desperation. And I feel like we're seeing some desperation that is a really important catalyst to imagining what might be next.
Yeah, I think that's right. Just really at a crossroads and so much on the horizon. Warren, were you going to add something as well?
What you said, there's been more change in churches in the last couple of years than in the last 20 years of people saying, well, we just can't do that anymore, or we need to try something different as a way of furthering our mission to reach the world for Christ. And people are like, okay, that the resistance level has been way low. The challenge has been the leaders who are like, hey, this is what I know, but I'm entering an era of I don't know. how to lead, how to navigate, what the phrases, the words, how to touch the culture with the unchanging gospel in words that connect with the heart and soul. We are definitely in a season of transition.
Well, and Warren too, yeah, for sure. Warren, getting back to some of the numbers, and we have carefully looked at a lot of those. And I know you and I, even as we've reflected on what's been published by our friends at Barna, we were really curious about some of the challenges, right, that leaders are facing. So I think you had some questions there for David too, just about reflections around challenges of leadership too, right?
Yeah, we could ask a whole lot of things for why pastors stay, and what you're learning about that, and what we can learn about the importance of ministry leaders feeling supported by their communities. Let me just dig a little further in the research we did with boards, just to set it up further. We then took boards that viewed themselves as effective and compared boards that viewed themselves as ineffective. And then we looked at the soul care questions against that. And you don't get a sharper contrast. Effective boards, 83% of them said, we're doing a good job of caring for our pastor. And boards that rate themselves as ineffective, 26% said, night and day, we're not caring for our pastor. So talk to us about the structures and the pathways for leadership care.
Well, I think it's such an important conversation and such important work for us. So as we're thinking, as you're hearing this as a listener, just be thinking about the kinds of soul care priorities you have as a leader, as an institution. We've been working a little bit with a longtime friend and a colleague named Mindy Calaguire, who runs something called Soul Care, and she came and actually did a staff retreat for our team, and it was so helpful just a few months ago, and we're just in a really great place at a friend's cabin in the woods, so that helped to have a meaningful conversation. It's funny how a change of setting and a change of pace can really help us slow down and think about what it is we really want. And she had this great comment about the pandemic, that she said, it turns out that all of us are dealing with issues of soul care to one extent or another. And it was, she made this comment, it was like, we were all swimming naked, and then the pandemic took the tide out. And, it reminded us that we all were, in greater need, of, some help. And I think soul care is such an important and often overlooked conversation, even and sometimes especially among pastors and Christian leaders. And how can we hope to be the kind of salt and light in the world, and to build the kind of meaningful, transformational structures of ministry and pathways of ministry when we ourselves aren't being changed by that same message? And so, listen, we found a lot of really good things in the data. We find that a lot of leaders, even despite their challenges, are saying that they still feel called to this work. They say, despite the challenge of being a pastor, I can't see myself doing anything else. That was nearly 80% of pastors. I feel rewarded in my role as a pastor, 75%. But we only found that about half said that they prioritize their self-care as a pastor, and only 15% said they prioritize their self-care as a pastor. They strongly agreed with that. Only 14% said they feel like their own spiritual formation too often takes a backseat to other pastoral responsibilities, but more, almost 57% said that they agreed with that. And we found that about a third of all pastors say they're struggling with depression. So there was this really interesting mix, and pastors are humans too, of course, and they're dealing with a lot of pressures. But I think it's so important for us as we enter this new space of ministry to be thinking about our own hearts, and to be focused on heart health and on soul care, so that when the tide goes out, we won't be swimming naked next to all of our fellow swimmers. There'll be something that is deeper and robust in our lives in a very meaningful way, and that's been certainly my journey in the last couple of years. being under spiritual direction and finding even more and deeper roots in the scriptures this last 16 months or so. I mean, the scriptures have always been very important to me, but just for particular reasons, this last couple of years have been really rich. And the Lord's presence, in my life as a leader has been something of just a singular place of clinging to. And so I would encourage leaders that those who we actually saw really interesting patterns in the data. Those who were the least likely to want to quit were also the ones who were most likely to attend to these issues of soul care, and realizing that they have to work on themselves and be worked on by others who care in really open-handed ways. And I think those are some important themes that we saw compared to those who were willing to quit. We actually saw a lot less prioritization. Now, it's correlation, not causation, but there's a lot of really important trends in the data that tells us that when we pay attention to our inner lives and put ourselves in a community where we're actually surrendered to them and want to see them help keep us in the game, there's actually some real power in saying, hey, I'm not enough to do this work. Only through God's grace and through the power of other people around me can I do the work.
David, that's really rich and profound. That let me just say it back to make sure we're hearing you right. Those who are the least likely to quit are the ones who we're not doing causation, we're just doing correlation, are the ones who are most likely to be in some kind of self-care or spiritual direction. And the opposite, those
That's
who
right.
are most likely to quit or say they're going to quit are not having that level of self-care. Wow. So maybe that's a very practical tip to encourage those who are feeling discouraged or wanting to burn out, in essence, to say, you can get help.
I think it is. Yeah. And I think we have all these tools. I doubt there's a single leader out there who's gotten into ministry without at least some of these tools being put in place. I know we can sometimes bash on seminary, we can bash on certain structures of ministry preparation, and I actually think those need to be rebuilt too. But I also feel like in our toolkit, there's a lot of us who are going through who've got the tools there, and I would even say don't underestimate the fact that we've even done some research. It's been a number of years, but we see a number of pastors who actually come to us and say, we're actually having a crisis of our own faith. And so sometimes they don't know where to talk about that. And I think, again, you're not alone. Whatever it is you're experiencing, whether it's depression or mental health issues or challenges in your marriage or challenges with your kid or struggles with pornography or a lack of confidence in your own ability as a pastor. A fascinating thing I think to look at is how people's skill sets change over their career. And recognizing that we're all going to face a certain kind of decline in how we do what we do, but there's also like a second curve we can get on as pastors and leaders. And so just being honest with ourselves and with others, and most especially with God, about where we are, and taking those insecurities and those hurts. Listen, I think a lot of pastors, a lot of us as leaders are carrying a whole suitcase full of accumulated hurts of people who've left our churches, budgets that didn't balance, people who said things, people we tried to trust, people we tried to extend help to, who ended up, bad-mouthing us on the way out, or spreading vicious rumors about us, or just leaving without ever saying goodbye. We marry them, we bury them, their family members. I guess someone who gets buried leaves without saying goodbye. But we have all these accumulated hurts, and I could just say from my own experience as a leader that the one place we can take our accumulated hurts is to the Lord. And the better we can be at taking that suitcase of accumulated hurts and unpacking it and putting it in the laundry with the Lord, and talking to others about it, and finding others who aren't a part of our local church, where we're not someone to them. We're just the people God has created us to be. I believe God can do some powerful things in us and through us as leaders when we've been able to take out that dirty laundry and let the Lord, kind of wash us and renew us, because it is really difficult work. now I think going forward in this complicated time, politics, economics, the kind of challenges we have with our staff, our relationships, so the more we can deal with that baggage, the more we can deal with these hurts, to talk about why they sting so much, why they can bring us to tears, why they can bring us to passive aggressiveness, or why we can show up each week with so many accumulated hurts. I think God is asking us to put those burdens down and to find a way to be renewed in his presence, through the word of God, through the Spirit's work in our lives, and most especially in the also in the tangible expression of human relationships and community.
That's right. Yeah, David, I appreciate so much of what you just shared there. And I want to come back to something, connecting dots or themes once again, to something that Warren shared earlier, which was this disconnect, between the leader and the board. And David, I would love for you to even just speak to maybe any board members who are listening. You talked about community, and that could be a number of people. It's not always the board. And we're not even saying boards should become a leader's, personal accountability group or anything like that. But boards certainly have a very unique role that they can play in this area, providing a level of support, to the leader in terms of maintaining health and even integrity and all those pieces. So I'd love for you just even speak to any board members who might be listening around that theme of being a community to the leader.
Yeah, I think governance issues are kind of the unseen, often undiscussed part of the structure and the health of an organization. I don't know quite what, maybe you guys have a good analogy of what sort of bodily system it's closest to, the circulatory or the nervous system or the skeletal structure or the limbic system. Any and all those could work in a certain way, right? Do you have a quick response to that? Which sort of system is most like the importance of governance?
Well, I'm going to let Warren answer that question, because my wife will tell you she's a nurse by background. I failed anatomy. So, Warren,
well, every one of them has a rich metaphor. And David, in our talking, I've just loved all the word pictures that you have used. So you pick the analogy and metaphor you want to use and walk us through it.
Okay, well, we'll just go with the fact that they're an important sort of unseen system, right? Like any of these sort of parts of our body where you're like, wow, it is sort of like magic as the way the Lord has created it. And governance is an important part. We see it throughout Scripture. Obviously, it's an important part of sort of building of organizations. God's created human beings with the capacity to, lock arms and do things together in not just as individual humans, but as collective entities and institutions and nonprofits, and governance is so important. So I would say first, don't underestimate just the power of really good governance and how, like a super strong skeleton or circulatory system, it is unseen and sometimes unthanked, but it is essential to the movements of these organizations and then to the flourishing and thriving of the leaders and the people that they serve. And I would just encourage you to be a really safe place to listen. I mean, I think today's leaders, I'm encouraged by the fact that leaders are so open in our surveys. People are talking pretty openly. They're anonymous surveys, but they talk about their porn issues, or they talk about their identity issues, or their insecurities. And I think that's a great moment for survey research. I'm sure Warren would agree that that it's actually, people still love to give their opinions, and they're so open and honest. It sometimes shocks me, and it's good. It's good for business. It's good for our work. But I just think being willing as a board chair, or as any member in a governance community, to just really listen, to be careful not to take that leap. Well, we do it this way in our business, and so it must work this way in the church. The church is not built on business principles, even though there can be some important overlap. To be careful not to be the sort of the know-it-all and the easy answer person. There's very deep and systemic issues that can be part of the issues that plague our organizations. And we have a challenge, I think. Sometimes pastors, if we're really being honest, they love preaching and teaching. I mean, they tell us in the surveys, 7 out of 10 say that their main joy comes from preaching and teaching. And fewer than 1 in 10 say they love leading and administrating. So, there is actually something structural about the way we've kind of layered the expectations of good communicators are also good leaders, and good leaders can be good communicators. They often are, but not every good communicator is a good leader. And I think we're actually seeing I think the pandemic actually, when the tide went out, we noticed how unclothed our discipleship efforts were, because we were building around the communication capabilities of one or two or whatever really talented leaders, but we haven't structured, and this is a big word here, but the pedagogical structures. We haven't created a learning community where we are all learning from one another under the way of Christ. And yes, there are certain sort of echelons of leadership, and pastors and prophets and apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, and evangelists. And we need different gifts to sort of edify and build up the church. But we haven't, I don't think, organized around the kind of things that really help people to learn in this crazy era of digital technology and the rest. So I just ask good questions, be a good listener, be willing to see that there are probably deeper answers to the questions that you're asking, and it's not always simple. But then pursue the ability for these leaders that you're serving to be wholehearted human beings. Don't push them under the weight of like, how can we grow? How can we grow? How can we grow? How can we redesign job descriptions towards the flourishing of the people that we're serving? Are they actually becoming new and better people? They're being transformed. We can measure that stuff now. It's imperfect, but it's better than just like, hey, did people show up? Did they give? And, what's the health of our organization from a numbers perspective? I think we can actually do a better job today of really saying, yeah, we're actually changing people's mindset and their lived experience related to relationships. Did your ministry do that? And I think there's some really great ways that we can focus on some deeper goals together. What Christ really calls us to in these areas of discipleship.
And I think board members would be wide open to that. One of the things that consistently came through in our board surveys was in essence, I'm underutilized. You typically get top people on your board, and then if they feel like, hey, but I'm not really tapped, and there's a lot more I could give here and contribute, that tells me at least that there's a lot of space for exploring the very things, David, that you've been talking about.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think doing that in the right way where, because I think we'd all agree that having boards that are overstepping their bounds is not what we want. We don't want boards doing the work for the organization, but I think there's ways that there can be some really critical roles that are mission aligned, that are effective, that keep the right circles, sort of staff and administration. Speaking of like Christian higher education, like I'm a board member at a Christian college, Christian university, and there's moments where I'm like, oh, we could do this for you. They're like, no, that's not our job as a board. But I think there are things that I could do, or that we could do as trustees, that we're often not asked to do. And so I think leaning into both parts of wisdom there is really important.
Plus, I would say we've never seen healthy leaders who are thriving, who don't also say, and I have a great relationship with my board or my board chair, whatever that looks like in their particular context, that it is possible to have a healthy, thriving kind of partnership where the leader feels truly supported, not strong-armed, not controlled, but helped and supported and personally cared for as well.
That's right. Good, Warren.
Yeah, that's right. That captures so well, both of you, just the heart behind ECFA, this initiative that we're on around leadership integrity and health. And David, I know you've got to run. We've got to let you go here. But you and Warren, any other final thoughts before we bring this particular conversation to a close?
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you both. Warren, I respect your work and have been admirer, and you've been such a good friend to me through the years. So thank you for that. You've always been such an encouragement to me and to our team and to the work we're doing. So thank you, and want to mirror back that same words of encouragement and kindness. And I think, as we go into this sort of new era, new wineskins era, I'm really excited in hopeful and also, sobered about the reality of what that's going to look like for us as leaders and as institutions, because so much seems like it's up for grabs. But I'm grateful for this conversation. I just want to keep encouraging you as leaders and listeners, whatever station you find yourself in, whether it's in a local church or a board member or, working alongside an organization as a Christian leader. A lot of us are sort of in a role of sort of serving alongside local churches. Like, just let's keep caring for our own hearts and, surrendering ourselves to the Lord's great purpose for us. We are, after all, a masterpiece who's been created in Christ Jesus to do these good works that long before we knew of what COVID-19 would be, he knew and expected and understood that this kind of change would happen. And I think a lot of this is accelerating needed changes for us as institutions, but especially for us as leaders. And so this is a re-invitation to take our very selves to the throne room and ask the Lord to give us wisdom and grace and peace for this next season of leadership. And I'm excited by it. It's a daunting task, but I think it's a task worth doing.
And I would just amen that and encourage everyone, don't settle. Don't settle for mediocrity. Don't settle for a poor relationship. God wants you to thrive. Your leadership will thrive. The board relationship will thrive. That is possible. Don't give up. Don't settle for anything less.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you both. And David, too. Folks that are listening, I know many have already really dialed into the work at Barna, but how do they stay up to date with you and some of the new research? And we'll put, by the way, a link in our show notes to the research projects that we've been talking about today on healthy leadership. But yeah, how do folks stay in touch with you, David?
Well, the best is to sign up for our free email newsletter at barna.com, and we'd be happy to have you join.
Great. Well, again, thank you, David. Thank you, Warren. This conversation has been so helpful, I know, even to me and to those listening. And speaking of those listening, thank you so much for tuning into this ECFA podcast. I hope that, some of the points here that both David and Warren raised really just spark something in you. And there will be more episodes to come as we just unpack a lot of these ideas behind what can leaders do, even individually, for a lot of their own health, but even the community that's surrounding a leader and the board of an organization. How can they do that? So I hope it sparked, just some really good thoughts for you and even questions. We'd love to hear what questions do you have as you're reflecting, and even at a practical level, if there's certain topics or angles that you would like to hear from. Just encourage you to connect with me personally at president@ecfa.org, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you.
We can't thank you enough for listening to ECFA's Behind the Seal podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We're planning on releasing 2 a month in 2023. And share this with a friend, a coworker, a ministry partner, a board member. The more conversations we're having about leadership integrity and healthy leadership and the soul of the leader, the better. And don't forget, this is all compiled at ecfa.org/podcast. That's ecfa.org/podcast.